the experience and knowledge you can gain in hospitality, in my opinion, are second to none. And I'd like to take you on a little bit of a journey about job satisfaction, never-ending learning, and the joy of seeing teams come together, develop, expand their skill set, and deliver fantastic customer service. So a little bit about my background with that. How did I start in hospitality? Well, like so many others, I kind of fell into it. I came to the UK to do a master in business and wasn't really thinking of ever working in a restaurant or anything like of that sort. I did my dissertation and during that time thought it would be good earning some money, as you do, and maybe get to know some people. So I applied as a bartender in a big venue in Cardiff. And despite the first initial difficulties, mainly understanding drunken accents, I absolutely loved it. I loved the lifestyle, I loved the people I met, and I just loved the buzz of everything. Now, I've been doing that for quite some time, working there, and there was still that nagging feeling eventually once I graduated off, well, I obviously need to do something with my degree. You got parents who question you of like, why do you want to be a bartender? Why would you continue doing that? And eventually but I love what I'm doing kind of has to make way for, is that really what I want to do? So I did, while still working there, I did an internship, which was actually in my area of supposed expertise in marketing. And I didn't like it. I missed the buzz. I missed the vibe. I missed the people. I just didn't enjoy it. And it was actually a really crucial meeting I had with my bar manager at the time, who just asked me the question of what you want to do, where you want to go. And it actually started with, how about I go into management? They didn't have any position. So he literally encouraged me to apply elsewhere, which it's a lesson I've learned ever since, that sometimes you need to encourage people to branch out and try something new for their own job satisfaction. And well, that is what I did. I applied for a management position in a restaurant, and that's how it started. Now, obviously, it wasn't all plain sailing, and obviously there were difficulties and all the things that happen when you start as an assistant manager in a new team. But bottom line was, I loved it, and I finally could see a path of, this is where I can apply myself. This is also where I can apply everything that I've actually ever learned from a business aspect, which I wasn't really aware of. And what surprised me most is that I loved working with people. And it wasn't something I really considered before, but that is exactly what it is. And hospitality for me is all about people. Now, obviously, a big aspect of hospitality is customers. And in order to not get completely demotivated by your customers and your customer complaints, an important aspect is efficient and effective customer service. Now, there's a lot of restaurants out there. I think we've all either been to them or people who work in the industry have worked in them, where service seems just to be, you just about get a smile, very perfunctory, and just not really a place where you want to go back to. And I possibly worked in a place like that as well for a while, where other things were more important, just getting that food out and getting more guests in, and that was it. It changed with different restaurants. And one of the key aspects for me for great customer service is actually one word, by not calling them customers and calling them guests. And suddenly that changes, in my opinion, the whole dynamic of how you treat your guests. You're inviting them into your restaurant like you would invite them into your home, and you want to look after them. And depending on what restaurants you're in, it is about reading their expectation, understanding your guests. What do they like? What don't they like? Why are they here? And that is a key aspect that I think, particularly working in the Ivy, we had an opportunity to really go deep into that and create some fantastic opportunities and guest satisfaction. Because there's a big difference if you have a lunch meeting where you don't want any interruption, where you quickly want that food, where everything needs to just be silent in the background, or you have a big celebration and you know the guests would really like to have a fuss made about them. So yes, it is all about
speakers meet.
Why are guests in your restaurant, and how can you make sure that their expectations are being met? Now, obviously, we've all probably been there from a guest perspective. We don't always get it right. Sometimes the food can be cold, or you're waiting too late, for way too long, or just something happened. Now, for me personally, I ended up enjoying dealing with complaints. I was first absolutely petrified. First couple of complaints when I first started out, I didn't know what to do. I've been screamed at. I've been called all sorts of things. Many of the reasons why people don't like going into hospitality as well. But you get better. You stick with it, and you get better. And yes, I love dealing with complaints. The easiest ones are the ones where you can honestly put your hand up and say, we've made a mistake. The food was cold, the food was delayed, we didn't recognize a particular guest, we lost a reservation, anything like that, or the waiter misunderstood something and came across rude. All of those things, very, very easy, in my opinion, to deal with, because all you have to do is be genuinely sorry. And particularly over the phone, it is about having that smile on your face, because it can be heard even over the phone. And yes, in my opinion, that is something that can be dealt with quite easily. And by getting to know the guest over the phone, in person, via email, and living up a little bit to what they might have in mind or what they originally expected, gives you a beautiful angle of how to take the conversation forward. And possibly, and in most cases, I would actually say, to get a really, really loyal and repeated guest coming back to your restaurant. Obviously, there are also other complaints where you might have not done anything wrong. You have done everything above and beyond what you could do, but they're still complaining. And particularly in certain restaurants, and I think the Ivy would be one of them, sometimes those complaints can be a little bit out of your hand. It could be that the table just wasn't right, because they absolutely wanted only that one particular table, and the fact you couldn't provide that one table is a nightmare, and it is a disaster. Now, those complaints are a little bit different to deal with, but again, it is not about winning an argument or being right. It is by understanding the guest and having one or two options in your head at any given time of how that conversation could actually go, and having a solution in the back of my mind, particularly having more than one solution in what you could offer. And it's not about giving away a whole meal for four. Absolutely not. That should always be the last resort. It is a lot more about listening. And sometimes all that I would offer is to tell a guest, this is my phone number, this is my email address, please come again, and I will make sure you will get that table and you book directly with myself. And surprisingly, that has actually worked on many, many occasions. And sometimes you don't just give them a little dessert or a glass of champagne on arrival, but it is those little gestures, and particularly a quick response. I could probably not stress how important it is to get back to a phone call or an email, not just within 48 hours, but within 24 hours immediately, and to be genuine on the phone. It makes all the difference. But it's obviously not just about the guests, and it's, in my opinion, actually not necessarily the most important aspect of your restaurant. For me, it's the staff, it's the team. If you get the right team, they will look after your guests. And that is, after all, the most important aspect. That is why everyone goes to a restaurant and wants to enjoy themselves. So for me, it's about team, and it's about motivating and developing your team. And for me, motivation does actually start with recruitment. You need to get the right people. And that only happens when you spend some time and care and listen. So for recruitment, you could very easily say after 2 or 3 weeks time, that person just doesn't work out, or even after 3 months time, let's just fail that person's probation, they're just not good enough. I would actually ask someone to stop and ask themselves the question of, why did you hire that person in the first place? And not necessarily blame that person for not knowing something or not doing something right. What have you done to get that person to the right track, to get that person to the level that you want them to work at, to the level that you want them to operate? Have you spent time with them? Have you listened to them? Do you know what they actually like? Do you know why they actually wanted the job? All of those aspects you find out when you start talking to people and caring about their needs and their wants. In many respects, it's not much different than a relationship. It's about trust, and it's very much about values. Do your values, or the values of your restaurant and how you manage and deal with everything, do they align with the person you have just hired? If they're very different, it will ultimately not necessarily work out. What motivation does that new staff member you hired actually have for working? Do they want a career? Which means they probably want to get challenged. They want as much knowledge as possible. They want to be exposed to many different aspects of the business. Are they just here on a gap year? Which is fantastic and a very, very viable option of earning some money. But you might want to manage them slightly differently and motivate them slightly differently. That could be more hours. That could be certain aspects of the business that will go better for them. Or is it just someone who needs to pay their bills, who don't quite necessarily know why they're actually there working for you? All those aspects are incredibly important already on recruiting stage to understand, why are people working for you? And it's an ongoing aspect, and it's something that I incredibly enjoy. The listening and the spending some time, yes, it can be exhausting, but I think once you are in that role, it is the most rewarding and the most important part of the job. For one example, I've had a waitress that I actually recruited myself. Quite often I would have other managers who would be in charge of recruitment, but I was interviewing her, and I could tell she was a bit different, but she was incredibly passionate about working in the industry, and I liked her. There was something, I would say, a good vibe of, I think that could work. We need to fine-tune certain things. We need to maybe adapt a little bit to the style of service that we're doing here, but she definitely had what was necessary. And it came Christmas time, and unfortunately, she one day was really, really late and then just didn't show up for her shift. And I did find that incredibly out of character. So I contacted her, couldn't get through to her, left some voicemails, nothing, no response. Now, normally, after 1 or 2 attempts and someone just not getting back to you, well, you send up some letters and you literally have someone AWOL. So yes, you're going to start a disciplinary procedure, you invite them in, you try to find out what happens, and that then goes on and on. And I was very, very close of doing that, but something just didn't sit right with me. So despite having already contacted her and messaged her, all of that, I tried a different approach. And I tried a last long letter and email where I did plead a little bit on her conscience of like, look, that's not the person I met, and that's not, from your references and from your experience, what I would expect from someone with your background. And then I took a bit of a softer note by just saying like, look, if anything has happened and you might just want to talk to someone outside of the restaurant, I'm available for you to get in touch. And what was amazing is that within an hour of me sending that email, she did send me an email back apologizing and asking if I could meet with her. So we had a meeting, and it was emotional and eye-opening, I think, for both of us as well, that showing care and listening, and I think that's exactly what she needed. She just needed someone to listen. It made a difference. What I most remember about that meeting is at the end, when we said our goodbyes and we actually agreed that she will come back to work and we'll just put it down to some personal things happening, she did ask for a hug. And that was something that reminded me of why I do what I do and why I love it so much, because of the effect you can have on someone by just taking some time and caring for them. So she then came back to work. She never not showed up for a shift. I told her as well, like, if ever you have a really, really down point, all I'm expecting you to do is send me a message that you can't come to work. But even that didn't happen. She came to work. She certainly became one of our most reliable, hardworking waitresses. And yes, that is still where she is now. And we're talking about 10, 11 months later since she was hired. Just one of the examples of why I love hospitality, because it gives you opportunities. And if you're finding the right place where you're allowed to do certain things, you can give people chances and sometimes second chances. And being able to do that, I find incredibly fulfilling. I also want to talk about something from years ago, which was more about my personal lessons for leadership and management. I was a general manager of a restaurant, and I had to deal with a manager who wasn't performing, just didn't quite seem the right fit. Although he's been there for a long time, it just wasn't really going in the right direction. And I've never really before had to have those kind of conversations where you can't quite put your finger on it, what is wrong, but you really need to investigate it and you need to set that person some targets and just take it from there. Now, I had some guidance during that whole process, but that guidance wasn't quite what I expected, because suddenly that guidance was more about myself and self-awareness. So pretty much the challenge for me was to open up to that particular manager and ask him how he finds my management style and what I can do different in managing him. Now, that was something that threw me a little bit, because up until then, I always thought, hey, I'm the boss. I need to be completely unfazed, not really showing any emotions, kind of being right all the time, and, well, just being that kind of boss. And, well, it was certainly an eye-opener, because what he told me of how I came across, and just also through that whole conversation, I actually realized I'm not very approachable. I'm probably quite intimidating at times, and my expectations are incredibly high, and I probably don't communicate them well enough for people to get on board with it. Now, I think every one of us has at one point in our life received feedback, and obviously we all say we love feedback and we appreciate feedback, but it's a blow. It hurts. It gets you upset. You want to find reasons of, oh, it's not true. You kind of almost want to talk yourself out of it in your own head, until you might just sit there one day and think, blimey, they're right. And that opened up a completely new avenue. And over the years since that happened, I love telling that story. I love telling it because I think it changed how I look at myself, but also how I manage people. And it was almost that catalyst experience that, no, if you really want to manage people and you want to manage them well and you want to set an example, you need to be relatable, you need to be approachable. You need to have boundaries, absolutely. But I still find some of the best ways to motivate my team or to motivate individuals is by telling them stories. And those can be stories of my own failures, my own achievements, or similar situations that I might have had that relate to the problems or conundrums or anything they might be going through. And just tell them what I've done, how I felt, and maybe give them some perspective, and yeah, help them take it from there, asking those questions and helping them find their own answers. So yes, for me, leadership is about listening. It's about seeing people, and it's about seeing their potential and helping them fulfill it. And sometimes that can take a very, very long time, but when it works, for me, it's the most fulfilling thing there is. And that's why I love hospitality. Now I understand hospitality isn't for everyone. You need to have a love for food and beverages, and you definitely need a genuine love for people and helping them succeed and making guests feel happy and enjoy coming to your restaurant. Now, I might have not convinced any of you to drop your jobs or go out and start becoming a waiter or bartender or a chef, but maybe I was able to allow you a bit of a backdoor into hospitality and hospitality management. And maybe when in a few weeks' time restaurants are open again, and when we hopefully soon are allowed to socialize again, you'll go to a restaurant and you might just look at your waiter or your bartender or your manager with a different understanding and appreciation.